In this video, I'm going to share how to get faster at LSAT logical reasoning. I find that far too many students have trouble with pacing, they have trouble with endurance, they get bogged down, they get stuck on difficult questions. In reality, of course, every question is worth the same. Now, you've got roughly 25 to 26 questions in an LSAT logical reasoning section to solve in roughly 35 minutes. This gives you a little bit more than a minute per question, but of course, some are easier and some are harder. So there's no reason to spend an inordinate amount of time on any one question because they're all worth the same. If you're aiming for a score of 160 or above, which I recommend you do, you are, of course, going to want to solve every question in the section. I recommend blasting through the easier questions in the first 10, building up a time bank to apply to the tougher questions later in the section. So I recommend aiming to solve the first 10 questions in roughly 10 to 12 minutes, which is, of course, less than your average allotted time for each question on the exam, but then that gives you more than a minute and 20 seconds or so to solve the tougher questions that are going to come up later. The most difficult questions in the section are going to be roughly 15 through 22 or 15 through 23. Then the last couple of questions are slightly easier, somewhat surprisingly. So if you are going to flag difficult questions that you might risk getting bogged down on or stuck, you would probably want to do that somewhere within this range, generally speaking. Me personally, I'll flag even 3 to 4 questions in that range just because I don't want to deal with them in the moment. I'll flag them, I'll skip them. I trust that I'll be able to come back to them later because I'm working at a fast enough pace overall. So if I see a lengthy parallel reasoning question or a question that's very technical and science related, or one on philosophy, morality, aestheticism, topics that are very abstract and arcane, difficult for me to relate to, I'll just flag it, skip it, and deal with it later. If one of these appears in the first 10 questions or so, I'll probably deal with it in the moment because knowing that general order of difficulty means that you're not likely to have any level 5 super difficult questions in the first 10. But if it's 15 through 23, you're likely to have your level 5 difficult questions there. So I'm likely to flag those and skip them and come back to them later. So flagging is your friend. Don't be afraid to do it on even 3 to 4 questions. It's well worth avoiding that quicksand of getting bogged down and getting stuck. So remember, your pacing, first 10 questions, roughly 10 to 12 minutes. Build up that time back, apply to the tougher questions later in the section. So know your question types in general, of course, know the 15 or so different types of logical reasoning questions and know which ones come up most frequently, like necessary assumption, flaw, and inference are the 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions. Be airtight and clear on those. And then also similarly, know which question types that you don't like and that you're most likely to want to flag and skip, which in many students' cases would be parallel questions or parallel flaw or method of reasoning. Those are a little bit less common and oftentimes more difficult or more time consuming. And so those may be your candidates to skip. Now, logical reasoning will take on increased importance for any of you taking the LSAT after June 2024. And this applies to many of you applying to law school next cycle. Even if you're aiming to take the LSAT in April or June, there's a decent chance, statistically speaking, that you're going to want to retake it in August or beyond when, of course, logic games will not be on the exam any longer. LSAT will be replacing logic games with a second scored logical reasoning section. So starting with the August LSAT, you'll have 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comprehension section, and 1 unscored experimental section of either logical reasoning or reading comprehension. This means that logical reasoning will be worth double what it currently is. So those of you taking the LSAT next cycle, potentially in August or beyond, you're going to want to spend a lot of time on logical reasoning because any gains you make in this section will be doubled relative to, say, reading comprehension, which is only going to be 1/3 of the exam, roughly. So you're going to want to spend a lot of time on logical reasoning. Luckily, there are dozens of logical reasoning sections you can study from since the LSAT, historically speaking, prior to the pandemic, had 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comp, 1 scored games. So half the exam prior to the pandemic was logical reasoning, plenty of practice material for you to study from and learn from. So make sure you spend significant time devoted to this section if you're taking the LSAT and applying to law school next cycle. Additionally, you should know that starting with the August LSAT, your unscored experimental section is also disproportionately likely to be logical reasoning because LSAT will need to test out double the number of logical reasoning sections as they will games or reading comp. They're actually not testing out games anymore at all because, of course, they are removing it from the exam starting with the August LSAT. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. Maybe you know someone studying logical reasoning, having some trouble with the speed, looking to improve their pacing, or maybe you know someone taking the LSAT after June 2024, in which case logical reasoning will be 2/3 of the exam. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.